Alrighty folks, for this video I wanted to do a simple part of Wi-Fi. It's not really simple, but it is simple. Is your Wi-Fi channels. I know I've touched on this I think in a couple videos and stuff like that, but it's very important to understand how a Wi-Fi actually works. The Wi-Fi communicates out on a certain channel. Most of the time you can set it for one fixed channel. Some more sophisticated devices will actually scan all the channels and change the channel to what channel is least populated at that time. There's good features and there's bad features to that. Bad feature is if you're on the internet streaming a movie and it sees there's too much traffic on channel 3 and then changes the channel to channel 11 because nobody's on that channel at that time, you could lose internet connection. You have to unconnect, reconnect to get back to connecting to that router on that proper channel. So there's good and there's bad to it. But most routers, you dedicate a channel. Basically, on the older 2.4, you basically have 3 channels now that they say you should really use. That's where a lot of the issues are with the 2.4 network. Those channels get crowded. There's too many devices on that channel. And it just keeps getting worse. Because one of the factors they have is now they have this 5G or 5.0, whatever you want to call it, 5 gigahertz. People go, oh no, but that solves the problem. Well, the other problem they have is a lot of people put in this network to use the 5, and all their devices are set for 5, but they still leave the 2.4 enabled. 2.4 will travel further than the 5. So a lot of places actually had put in 2 different routers. So like a doctor's office or something else that has a guest side where the lobby is, they may have one up towards that part, and where the doctors actually work, there's one on the back side. Well, they can subnet those 2, keep them on a separate kind of network so they don't see each other. Problem is now you have 2 more devices that are broadcasting on that networks. So depending on how things are, unless someone goes in and says do not broadcast this or hide this or turns that off, you could end up with more traffic on these channels. The other real benefit to the new 5 is there's more channels. There's roughly about 36 of them. So you could have less devices on each channel. But it goes back to the same drawback. Is now a lot of these places are using more devices to cover the same range. But you should end up with more channels, because if they're only using 1 device or maybe 2 devices to begin with, and now they're using 3 or 4, yeah, you got a multiplication and figure it out. Yeah, you probably end up with a few more channels that are available. If you get into some high dense areas, apartment buildings and other things like that, and you have multiple apartment buildings in a big downtown area, it's going to be pretty hard for you to find a channel anywhere that nobody's on. So that goes back to checking, downloading software. You can get it on a phone. I think even computers, they have the software that you can check what Wi-Fi channels are available, how much traffic's on it, how much flow, who's broadcasting, if there's 5 routers on this channel, what software on my phone, I can see you know, how many routers are actually on each of these channels. These are handy things. This is something that when you're trying to set up a network and trying to get the max speed and trying to get the benefits out of it, that you'll need to do. This is also important for your setup. But if you're not streaming a lot, but nowadays with the pandemic and all of this other stuff, there's a lot of streaming. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of people are on the Wi-Fi. Nowadays, people may buy a Wi-Fi router and may not even be using the Wi-Fi at all. They're using a wired network because they have 3 devices or 4 devices, that's it, that are on the internet. Maybe they're only using it to connect their phone, if even that. Because a lot of people are probably paying for unlimited internet on their phone and unlimited stuff, so they're not even using the internet at the house. So these are some of the factors, because nowadays you can go out to the store and pick up, you know, an older generation Wi-Fi router, mentioned in the other videos, thrift stores, $10, $15, maybe a discontinued for 30, something like that. And you put that in because you have it in case you decide you want to use it. Not to mention, it covers all of your other networking. It's gigabit supported. It's, you know, fast enough that you don't have to worry about. All your ports are gigabit. So why not? You run into other factors that you might not comprehend or understand. Especially with this pandemic and the Black Lives and all this other riots and movements and all this other stuff that went on. I've mentioned a lot of it in my security videos. That brings up those questions of, there's a lot of things that aren't mentioned and not brought up, and the security side of it and all these other things that are going on. So it brings me back to, you know, people may be doing things that are unconventional, but they're not unconventional. Because they might be using wireless routers when they should actually be using physical hardware straight routers. Even in a business environment, you might be guilty of this. You're in a small little business, you know, you go out, oh, well, there's a router here for $40, but I can get this wireless one for 45 or 50. Oh, you know, I can get that one because in case I need it later, I can do wireless. Not realizing you're clogging the traffic airways up. Because really it doesn't matter to you because you're not using it, and if you do, you're going to use it so little. So these are just some of the little things that I wanted to mention, because it's really something that isn't really that bad, doesn't affect you. It may not be something that you've thought of, but when you go online and you start looking up this stuff about the channels and how cluttered all these networks are, and all these things get full, and all these broadcasts, and how many devices are actually attached, and how many routers are talking at one time and trying to talk, it's kind of shocking to know these numbers. When you actually look and you scan and you, oh wow, look at, like, how do I pick up so many? You know, I can't imagine a major populated area with the buildings and skyscrapers all around. They're probably in hundreds of thousands on each one of these channels. You know, it's something that really, as being an IT person, when you go in and you troubleshoot some things, and then you go and troubleshoot somewhere else, and you, oh, like, wow, like wow, it's kind of a shocking number to come across sometimes. So I figured this is something I need to mention to bring out to everybody else, especially home users. Especially if you go out and buy a brand new router, you buy a nice, you know, even a Wi-Fi 6, you're going to have that same problem. Because Wi-Fi 6 is smart and it figures out what devices are not actually your devices. So it kind of ignores them, so it doesn't acknowledge them. But it's still waiting to broadcast and everything on the same channels. You still have the same problems. So it helps in some ways, but it doesn't really help the overall picture. It's kind of an interesting thing that is out there, and I've seen it, and I've never really quite like, oh, you know, this could be a problem, because, you know, now that I've actually seen some numbers on some of this stuff, when I go in and someone tells me, man, my Wi-Fi is so slow, and I just got this and I just got that, and I do a Wi-Fi scan of channels, and I'm, holy smokes, there's 100 people on, you know, channel 3. Like, wow. Because everybody bought certain models and certain times where the default channel was default 3, and nobody changed it to anything else. So it's just as simple as changing their channel from 3 to 11, and everything was good. So there's little factors like that. You know, scanning those channels, especially the new 5 network. There's so many channels. To make sure you're not on the same channel with someone else is really a benefit. But like I said, when you get into those really, really populated areas, you're going to have to look. The software that I had actually has per channel how much bandwidth it's going through each channel also. I'm sure that's probably really needed for those popular areas, because just because you see there's 100 devices on, you know, channel 3 and there's 150 on channel 11, there might be more bandwidth going through channel 3 than there is 11, because those devices might actually be pretty much dead devices that aren't being used. They might be ones that are being used as routers and other things that someone bought. You know, you have a small little apartment, you have your Wi-Fi that comes in, your internet that comes in, you have a Wi-Fi router, you have your computer, and you have, you know, maybe a TV on the other wall, and you ran a cable around. You might not even be using that Wi-Fi at all. You know, if you're in an apartment building with, I don't know, 300 apartments, and everybody's got the same thing in their apartment, how many other people aren't using it? So this is one of the factors I wanted to bring up when it comes to that. You know, it's not as easy as cut and dry, but it is easy as long as you know to look at these couple of steps. And then you'll probably see a huge performance difference. But when you get into the 2.4, there's not a whole lot of channels. There's basically 3 channels you can choose from. When you get into the 5, I believe there's about 36, 35 channels that you can choose from. Depending on what country you are in, there's different regulations, different channel bandwidths. But like here, you should be okay. Except for, of course, now you're in this huge complex building with 300 people, and they're all using all these channels again. But here's the kicker, like I mentioned. They have that hooked up. Maybe they hooked their phone up, and they're using both bands. They have both bands broadcasting. What band does your phone use? Yours is a modern phone and all of that. It's going to use the 5. So actually the 5 would be used, the 2 would be dormant. It's not being used. Most users will not disable that. They don't know how, they don't get in there, they don't fiddle with those settings. So that's on the other video I have, I mentioned that you could really cluster and fill these channels without really knowing, because you might buy that unit and use it just as a router, and it's broadcasting out on those channels where it's actually affecting everybody else around you, because you bought it in case you need it later. Got a great deal on it. Found it at a thrift store. Someone gave it to you because they upgraded. You know, there's a lot of variables there. You know, you had a 10100 switch. That one's a gigabit. You know, there's a lot of variables why people have done these things that really people probably haven't thought about, because it's not really the best practice to do these things, but it's not really hindered against doing these things. It's probably a lot of people would recommend you doing these things, because then you don't have to go out and re-buy something later. You already have what you need. So there's good and there's bad to it all. So I wanted to touch on this. Make sure everybody's aware, because you might be thinking, well, I'm in an area there's not a lot of people. Maybe you're in an elderly area where there's a lot of older people, where they're not using a lot of Wi-Fi, they're not using a lot of stuff, but you go and you check using the software and you see there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of bandwidth, a lot of people on these channels. It might be just as simple as people have the equipment, they're just not using it for that reason. They're using it as standard network equipment, because that can function as a standard piece of network equipment. You don't need a switch if you have a wireless router that has the ports. You know, it could have been their grandson, their son came over, set that up for them, without them actually realizing all the features and capabilities that that device actually has, because they don't need it. So these are some of the factors I wanted to bring up, because the other factor is you might be that senior person or that elderly person that has that device thinking about, man, I wish I had Wi-Fi to connect my phone to so I'm not using all my data, because I've got a senior plan where I don't have unlimited data and this and that. You might already have that physical device in your home. I have all the videos about the hardware and all that. Go check all that out. It'll show you what most devices look like, how they look. Some of them are really deceiving. Some of those neck gears and stuff don't even have an external antenna. So if you looked at it, you might not even realize that is an actual Wi-Fi device. You might just think it's a switch. So that's one of the things, is if you download the app, you know, Wi-Fi analyzer type app, you can look, you can see what's available. Other key feature with that app is it's handy to use to make sure you don't make a mistake on your Wi-Fi setup. Make sure you don't have like guest network open without a password. Make sure your password, your wireless network, shows it's secured, that it has a password. Little tiny things, because you might have put that in there and forgot to hit apply and save those settings. These are little steps that you can do to cover yourself to make sure your network's safe too. You might need that to troubleshoot someone else's network that you know. Your friend, your mother, your father, your grandparents, whoever. This is something that probably a lot of people don't know. So this is what I wanted to really cover on the Wi-Fi, the channels, to make sure, because I don't think I went into any detail on channels, but I wanted to do one on the channels so people are aware. Of course, there's always what channels are best and all of this stuff you can do research on, do your homework on, because really, I believe it depends on what area of the country you're in, what part of the world you're in, and all of this stuff, because there's certain channels that are used for certain other things and other things like that that might cause an interference that you might need to consider. Where here, where I'm at, it might not be a factor, but it might be a factor where you're at. You know, maybe you're in Oklahoma or somewhere like that where there's tornadoes and major storms and other things, or maybe some of those frequencies are used to broadcast out certain things. Last thing you want to be is on that channel where they're using that broadcast, sending out signal and squashing yours. When you know, all you have to do is go in and change it and you're good. Just little small factors that can relate to one single area. It could be town to town. Could be LA has a certain thing, San Diego has a certain thing, San Francisco has a certain thing that goes on different channels. That maybe you're better off staying away from a certain channel range or a frequency range and go to somewhere else. So those things you can research, you can do homework on, especially if you're using your internet and all of a sudden it just kind of boom and just bogs down and stuff, you have issues. Research the channels, figure it out for your area. If someone posts something like, hey, in this area, try to stay away from channel 3 because of whatever, maybe fire truck GPS, or, you know, any little weird thing that they have that, you know, could be broadcasting when they go by, or, you know, anything, you know, school buses or anything that go by that would affect you, trash trucks, you know, anything, you don't know. So those are little things that you can look at. Most of it is fairly simple to change once you learn how to log in and you get to the actual screen of where you need to be. Most router manufacturers and models are different, small differences on how you get to certain spots. But I just wanted to cover the channels because that's really something that's kind of important. I don't think a lot of people go into too much detail on it. They'll go in and show you, here you go, this is how you change the channel and this and that, and they'll show you a little bit of software, how you scan to see which software is out there and what's using what. I really wanted to dedicate some time to this because it's important that everybody understands this, because I don't think this is going to go away. It might go to 5 to 7 or 8 or, you know, 12 or whatever, just like cell phones. They have the different frequencies. They might add more due to how popular it gets and channels are getting crowded and all of this stuff. They might change some of this and add more frequencies depending on whatever's going on and whatever technology comes out. But it's important. And of course, I've mentioned it before. If you don't know where the technology came from, you don't know where we can go. You need to know the past. You need to know the current. You know, and if nobody's relaying any of this information or explaining this information or documenting any of this information, it's going to be harder in the future, because once my generation's gone and the next generation's gone, a lot of this old stuff that was out there is going to be forgotten. Black and white TVs, old TVs with the tubes in it. I remember I had to take the tubes to Rite Aid, another place. The actual Rite Aid stores are gone. You'd have to put the thing in there and it'd light them in and tell you if it's good or failing, and then you have to go and get the other one. And they were all different numbers and sizes and all that. I liked that when I was younger. That was fun. I thought that was cool. I think that's what sparked all of the interest in technology, was a simple, silly thing as a picture tube in a TV. That really caught my interest a lot. I remember that still today. I don't know very many memories have too many memories of stuff older like that. But this is one of the things. Nowadays, I don't even know if you can find the old tube or an old tube TV. You might, I don't even know if you can find one in a museum. You might find one in a museum. All this old stuff is going away. But it's where everything came from. You never know, that technology, that old tube TV with the old tubes that you put in, might end up coming back in the future, but maybe it's not a tube, maybe it's a whole component, a whole computer unit in there that you put in. Kind of like servers nowadays. They have the blade servers. You put the whole blade in, it's the whole server, CPU, memory, everything in there that snaps into a chassis. So you can have multiple servers in one box. You know, go back, watch some of my other videos. I haven't really talked about blade servers and other things in those videos, but this is really the interesting part of the technology. When I got into the technology, I remember when they had those out. That was another thing that really caught my eye, that kind of shocked me and stuff. That, you know, so I started looking into some of this stuff because it was interesting. So people can get drawn into these fields by stuff that's interesting. Might be weird, might be strange to you. It might be something you don't understand completely. But guess what? I didn't understand it either, but that's why I looked at these things and I understood it. Got me interested. Other things that came along in my life got me more interested in this stuff. To the point now I'm doing YouTube videos to let you guys all know some of these little simple things I've run across, so that you don't have all these issues. All these issues that I see on YouTube of people telling you just go and do this, go do that, and they leave out a bunch of stuff. So hopefully you like my videos. Hopefully you hit the subscribe, because I like doing the videos. I need people to leave comments on what I need to cover some more on, so I can do more, cover these subjects that people are stuck on. Maybe people aren't covering it. They're telling you bits and pieces, but they're not telling you the whole puzzle. I plan to do probably a stream live Facebook here in October coming up. It'll be 1 year of my channel in October. Want to put that out there. Don't have an exact date or what the subject will be, but it will be sometime in October. I'll be doing a live stream. Probably just a simple login setup, how you go through some of the features of Windows. But for wireless, the channels, I just wanted to cover a lot of this. When it gets into the speeds, of course, it goes on to your architecture and your other things that you have on your network. Depending on network speed, you may want to upgrade, maybe you don't. I know I've mentioned this before. Thrift stores and other things will have second-hand ones that may support your needs without paying a lot of money. Especially if you're a small business. I brought this up before. I've actually found, and I have on my video, a business grade wireless router. Found it at a swap meet. So I want to make sure that even the businesses understand. You're out wandering around somewhere, you might find something that fits your needs perfectly. And that business grade has the firewall and everything in it. That was a $10 device. You can buy the new models. I think they're $4.99. So it's something to bring up, even for a business. Even for a home user that might be a little bit more protective of his network. Buy the business grade with the firewall and all of that in it. You can find them. They're out there. If you come across it, snatch it up. But as for the channels, you want to make sure you pick the best channel for you. I know I bounce around a lot from subject to subject, but these are all interchanged. I want to mention that. That's why with this channel thing, it's important too. They're all interchanged because when I mentioned someone might have a router broadcasting out on one of these channels and not realize it's a router. And I don't want people to think that's stupid, he doesn't know what he's talking about, blah, 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 because they're not following the whole subject. I've just told you several scenarios on why someone might have a device that they don't realize is an actual Wi-Fi router. And if you're in a big building with 300 apartments and you got 6 buildings around you that have 300, 400 apartments in them, those are a lot of devices you could possibly have right around you. So I wanted to point out this scenario because I know it's a scenario that I've heard of, I haven't really come across, but it's really nowadays a more common place to have a Wi-Fi router that someone's using as a switch. And it's harder to explain that because a lot of times where people do that, where I've run into it, is you're in a country environment, the houses are further spread apart, and a lot of other things that are going on. You're not in a closed, confined space. But that's one of the scenarios that came through my head is I'm like, I wonder, you know, how many other people else have had this problem, but because I'm not in that kind of a dense population area, I'm sure there's others out there. So I wanted to mention that on this video. I wanted to bring that up. Even where I'm at, I pick up a lot of Wi-Fi signals. There's not really that many houses close to me. There's some businesses, there's some other things around, but I pick up a lot of Wi-Fi signals. I was actually quite shocked on how many Wi-Fi signals carry here. So I have a really hard time broadcasting my Wi-Fi here. So I've overdone it, put in a mesh network with a lot of units just to cover my area. So that might be a possibility that you might have to do too. You know, I'm sure everybody around here, their Wi-Fi cannot be that great because mine's suffering. But I know if someone else in this area reaches out to me and says, hey, you know what? Man, my Wi-Fi is just bombing. It's not going anywhere. It's barely reaching, 20 feet, 30 feet. I'm going to know exactly what they're talking about. Because this area I'm in is just dense. It is really, really dense with frequency. I don't know if it's due to the hospital or who's broadcasting or what in this area, but it's a heavy broadcast. Something's using the channels. So it's really hard to get Wi-Fi around here. So this is really what this subject was covering, because I've never really had that problem until I tried to widen the Wi-Fi network around here and realized, man, I'm just having a hard time getting the Wi-Fi to travel. So I'm sure there's others out there. I'm sure there's a lot more out there in a lot worse environments and situations that a lot of these factors would help out. And if worse things worse, if this does not help out, then you're going to have to look at scenarios of maybe a wired to a repeater to Wi-Fi mesh. But when you come into Wi-Fi mesh, you're still dealing with channels. Repeaters, you're still dealing with channels. How they communicate, you can wire it, wireless it from repeater to access point. Wired to the repeater to broadcaster is usually a better connection, because then you have two access points in two different locations. So if you're here, it can communicate that way, but if you're here, it'll communicate to this one. There's different scenarios. That goes back to your architecture of your network. Channels will come involved, depending on how they communicate, how they talk to each other, with bandwidth, 2.4, 5, all of that comes into play there too. So these are just some of the scenarios that I wanted to put out there, because when you get into some of the harder scenarios, or even a simple one, you might run into some variables that you might scratch your head and go, why is this happening? This should not happen. I should be able to connect where I'm at. So I wanted to bring these points up, mention the channels, all of this stuff that I've run across over the years. I'm sure I'll do more videos on the Wi-Fi, because there's a lot of variables here. Like I mentioned, access points and repeaters and all of these other things, but it all falls back to these channels. Knowing what channel you're on, how these channels communicate, how the devices communicate, how many devices communicate at once, knowing what device you have, how far your device actually communicates. That's another factor I've run across, is devices that don't have an external antenna normally don't broadcast as far. So that's one of the other factors you got to realize too when you do some of these devices, and you know these channels between 2.4 and 5. Run into a problem a lot with people in cell phones. Well, this should pick up a signal 80 feet from my house. No. This device can broadcast out to 40 feet and then 80 feet. Your device you have in your hand is different than the device in there. So your phone might not be able to broadcast 80 feet, but your wireless router can broadcast 80 feet. There's a difference. So again, like I said, 40 feet, 80 feet. You have your 5G, 4G, or 2.4. Sorry. Those are two different ranges that those can broadcast. And I'm just rough numbering those. Not every device is the same. Some devices say they can go further. Some devices are less. Depending on, some of these devices have 8 antennas, 10 antennas, 2 antennas. So the ranges are different. There's high gain antennas, there's regular antennas. So there's variables there. Goes back to the channels, the frequencies. As you could tell, I had to throw in 2 different distances. So that's one thing to remember with your devices. Just because that device says it can broadcast 150 feet, and you take your laptop out to 120 feet from that device, and it's not connecting, that's because your laptop will not communicate 120 feet. So that's one of the variables. And that could be just as simple as you have it set to broadcast on the 5 network only and not use the 2.4. So that might be a factor you need to look at, is do you have those features enabled? Do you have something disabled? Sometimes, depending on what areas you're at, it can broadcast a long way. Some places put in those high gain boosting, signal booster type dishes that shoot. Well, they advertise they can shoot 4 miles. But people don't understand is, okay, it's shooting 4 miles. It's sending a signal 4 miles that way. You need to have one on this side connected that can shoot 4 miles back. Now, you can drive a mile down that road, pick up your phone and go, hey, I see the signal that I can connect to that Wi-Fi. No, you're seeing it saying it's there because your device can't communicate that mile back. So that's one of the factors I wanted to bring up with the channels and the bandwidths, because that's one thing that I don't really see anybody telling anybody. It's based on both devices on both ends, how far each one can communicate. That's one of the main factors. And I really, really don't see anybody mentioning that. And I think that's an important factor that a lot of people need to know. Because your Wi-Fi router might be able to broadcast 40 feet on either frequency or both frequency. But say you're putting in a new, let's go for the extreme, solar panel, and they come put in a box and they're going to connect that to your Wi-Fi. Your Wi-Fi router, let's say this is your Wi-Fi router is here. And they put the box here. Okay, yeah, you're good. What if they put the box way over on that other side of the house? What do you need to do? You might either have to move this or tell them, no, you got to move that to a closer location. Or you got to put a repeater in, or you got to put an access point in. These are some of the things that can really mess up people that they don't realize, because that device might be able to broadcast 40 or 80 feet, but that device in that box might not. It might only be able to do 20 or 30. So you're 10 or 20 feet short. So that's one of the major factors that I hear a lot. And they always talk about check your channels, check your chain, check your frequencies, check this, check that. You need to know the distance. Because every time you go on there, oh, you should be good. It should broadcast 150 feet. No. No. Wi-Fi, no. There is no, you're safe up to 150 feet. Not like when you're running a network cable. When you're running Cat 6, whoa, you should be able to run 325 feet. No problem. I've run links longer than that, and it's worked. Why is that? Because the two devices on the end could support it. You can run over 1,000 feet of cable. Put a booster on each end. It can go over 1,000 feet. There's boosters that'll run over a mile. So these are factors that even network cabling has a standard. Like, this is where you should be safe up to. You can go past, you get some loss, you get some other things, but Wi-Fi, there is no standard. There really is supposed to be a standard on your device, how far it can broadcast. But what they can't change is if you have 500 devices, even the same exact device as yours, on that same channel, all broadcasting. And where they're at, they can be all located in different areas. So these factors come into play that change distance, to change how everything is. Because that's the problem I was kind of having here is, yeah, right within the house, right near my Wi-Fi, I was good. But if you go out just a little bit further, then I got Wi-Fi coming in this way, that you start having problems. Okay, so I went this way to try to expand. Well, I have Wi-Fi coming in this way. That's buffering, stopping me. Oh, okay, how about this way? Oh, well, I can get a long streak down here where the broadcast will travel. But then all along this side, there's more Wi-Fi. So my signal gets all jammed up from all the other Wi-Fi, all the other routers. So it's weird because here you think, well, I should be able to get 80 feet of distance. Well, there's actually one spot I can go out and get 80 feet of distance because I'm right in like a sweet spot between all the other frequencies and bandwidths. But then if I go over here, I get nothing. So when you test, you want to make sure you test all around, because you might pick up something over here that you don't really pick up over here, because that might be a 5G and a 2.4, but for some weird reason the 2.4 is barely showing over here, but of course the 5G won't be showing over here because it's too far. But you might have more coming from this way on those same channels. More 5 and more 2.4 and other stuff on those same channels you want to use. So these are the variables that you really want to look at and check. It can be kind of a headache, can be kind of annoying, but sometimes it's just what you got to live with. That's the way the technology is. Hopefully the next generation will be better, so you don't have to worry about this. But as for now, this is what you have to deal with. I'm sure probably later generations you'll still be running into some of these issues. Hopefully some of it will be worked out, but I'm sure you'll be still using the same tools. So I think I'm going to wrap this one up, because this one's gone on way too long for simple channels. But it is kind of an important factor, because when you troubleshoot a network, this is most likely where you're going to be troubleshooting the most of the network. Because if the hardware is working and the other hardware is working, you're going to wonder why they're not communicating. And once you set those up and you know they're good, and you know like you can go over within that area of that router and it's communicating, that's fine, and you walk away, and then all of a sudden you're going to be trying to figure out what's going on. So these channels are big time important, because understanding the difference between the 2.4 and the 5 can be a huge factor. Because again, if you're right next to that router, you might be on the 5. You might connect to 5. You need to double check that. Are you on the 2.4 or the 5? Some devices will actually change between the two different ones. Some will actually, you can set up, do I want to connect to the 2.4 or do I want to connect to the 5? They're different channels. But like this mesh, I believe, is you connect and it connects either way. You don't choose which one you want. So there's different things that different devices are set up for, how they're set up. So that's a variable that you may want to look at. How these things are set up, what's going on, and you know how things are done. So I hope that really explains a lot of this. I know I've gone on, but like I said, this is where a lot of troubleshooting and issues that I've dealt with all relate to, is these channels. How these channels are and who's using it and why. I wanted to cover some of that because it really surprised me with some of these numbers, and then after really thinking about it and looking things up, and oh, I can kind of see why, because people are buying these devices but they're not really using them, or they're using them very little. But now you have 1,000 units around you that all have these devices. So I wanted to put this out there, actually give some true numbers, some information so people understand it, because really it can be hard to understand and comprehend the total picture unless you actually go out and you use that tool and you scan, and you're as shocked as I was when you think, oh, there should only be 5 or 6, and you get a number of like 40. Like, what? How is there 40 on channel 3? You know, that's something that really will wake you up and go, oh wow, I didn't realize. Okay. And then you look at like channel 11, there's nobody. Channel 7, there's another 40, because those were the default channels and everybody's on the default channel. So you jump to channel 11 and all your problems are solved. But that's one of the factors I wanted to bring up. I know I've gone on real long, I keep mentioning that, but I do believe that's important for everybody to understand. Alrighty, I think I'll wrap this up. Make sure you hit the subscribe, make sure you hit the bell, make sure you leave your comments. Thank you.